Good morning. And again, we welcome you to this morning's study of the Sunday school lesson with us here at New Pilgrim Baptist Church, where we're located at 204 Shell Street in Saraland, Alabama. Dr. Charlie Williams is our pastor. This morning, our Sunday school lesson is again in the study of the unit of the prophets. And on last Sunday, we studied about the prophetess Huldah. And in that study, we found that she was instrumental in ministry through allowing God to utilize her. And when we look at the word prophets, we see that a prophet is an individual that God chooses to speak to or to speak through. So when we look at this prophet Elijah, we find Elijah being the mouthpiece or the spokesperson for God during this era. Our lesson subject for this morning is from the Townsend commentary, Elijah, prophet of courage. From the quarterly, the subject is the bearer of bad news. And from the standard commentary, our subject is prophet of courage. Lesson print is taken from 1 Kings, the 18th chapter, verses 5 through 18. And our key verse said, "He answered, and I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, in that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and thou hast followed Baal." And as we look at this lesson this morning, we find that it chronicles a time in the prophet Elijah's life where he's dealing with King Ahab. And so our main characters for our lesson this morning are the prophet Elijah, Obadiah, and King Ahab. And we'll also talk a little bit about Queen Jezebel. And as we look at the lesson, the characters this morning, we find that Ahab is a king that served after the division of the kingdoms into two kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And he's known historically as one of the worst kings to ever reign. And most times when comparisons are made to the kings of Israel or the kings of Judah, the comparison is either made to, if they were a bad king, is made to King Ahab, who was the chief of the chiefest of worst kings. And so in referencing him, they reference him as being a bad king because of the way not only that he ruled the kingdom, but because of the punishment that God pronounced against them during his reign. So as we look at Ahab, we find that Ahab not only was he a ruthless and an evil king himself, but he also had another dominant force that worked along with him. He was married to one of the most treacherous women in the Bible, Jezebel. And Jezebel was known for her idol worship. She was from an area where they worshiped the idols of Baal. And Baal was the god of water, of rain, of fertility. And so they, during this time, they were to a point to where in order to please this Baal god, they would make sacrifices, even up to and including sacrificing their own children so that they might have rain or that they might have water. And water is a very unique and a very necessary element. So there was a reason that they would make these sacrifices to Baal, because the water was dependent upon not only for their life, but for that of their animals, for growing crops and plants and all. So we find that in her worship of this idol, Jezebel was so committed to this worship until she influenced King Ahab, her husband, to build a temple to Baal. So in other words, he was influenced by this evil wife of his to build a temple to an idol god. And so for that, God gives the prophet Elijah a sentence or a punishment that he wants him to deliver to King Ahab. So we find that in this lesson, God has already pronounced this and that it has come to pass. God told Elijah to tell King Ahab that he was going to shut up heaven and that he wasn't going to allow it to rain for 3 years. Now, can you imagine what this was about to do to the temple of Baal? Because they just were so insured and trusted in their God of Baal that he was going to be able to provide this rain for them. But God showed them. And so as we look at this lesson background for a visual this morning, I have two things. I have the crown, which symbolizes Ahab's evil rule. And the passage where our lesson is taken from the book of First Kings, the 18th chapter. And this chapter is known for the showdown between the prophets of Baal and God. So the other visual that I have is a stack of wood, because, and this is not a part of our lesson, but this is what the passage is most noted for. During this showdown, God had them to build altars and to put wood upon this altar. So I have some wood here. And during the showdown, God was going to show them who was in control, because they were still not convinced that the God that Elijah was serving was the only true and living God. So God said, I'm going to have to give them some proof. He said, I shut up the heavens and I didn't let it rain for 3 years, but I don't think that convinced Ahab and Jezebel. He said, so we got to show Jezebel and these prophets of Baal who's in charge. So as we end the background of our lesson, we find now that it takes us to the point to where we are here. In the printed lesson today, we find that God has done just like he said. He gave Elijah this bad news to bear. Elijah went and gave King Ahab this news. And of course, it was news that they didn't want to hear, because they depended on this water system. So God told Elijah, you go down and tell Ahab that I'm about to shut the heavens up and it won't rain for 3 years. And after God gave Ahab this message through Elijah, sure enough, the heavens were shut up. So much so that this infuriated Ahab and Jezebel, because she really was almost in control of the kingdom. Whatever she told the king to do, he did it. In other words, he was a little henpecked. So she had control of the kingdom, and she told the king what to do. So now we see that as our quarterly lesson says, the bearer of bad news, Elijah got stuck with a bad bag. Instead of them taking the prophecy that came from God to be God's word, the king and Jezebel say it's your fault. Say instead of prophet Elijah's fault, because he came around here talking about this and he done upset these gods of Baal down here, and they not doing what they've been doing because he done confused them. He got them thinking somebody else is in charge. So as we look at this lesson unfold, we find that Ahab had gone about searching for Elijah. Now, after Elijah bared this bad news, God instituted one of the first witness protection programs. And Minister Spencer touched on that a little bit this morning during early morning worship. After Elijah delivered this message, God put him in a witness protection plan and told him, say, now, Jezebel and Ahab are upset with you. They got a bounty on you. Jezebel is determined to kill you because of what you done. So God said, this is what I need you to do, Elijah. I'm going to give you some instructions. And it may sound funny, but I need you to follow these instructions. And how do we come about this subject of courage? It's going to take courage in order for Elijah to do the things that he's going to have to do. But God said, I'm going to need you to go down by the brook, and I'm going to need you to stay down there by the brook until I tell you it's safe to go somewhere else. He said, in other words, you just go hang out at the brook until I tell you to move on. So Elijah did that. And as a part of this witness protection program, God instituted some servants to serve Elijah his meals every day. No, they wasn't dressed in black and white with bow ties on, but they were ravens. And the ravens were birds that were known as predatory birds that would eat up stuff. Can you imagine a bird that's usually eating stuff delivering this meal to Elijah and putting it down before him and standing back watching him eat and saying, Elijah, do you need anything else? And I don't see anywhere in here where it says Elijah tipped these ravens, but God was the one who was sending them. So I'm quite sure that God had already made provisions for these ravens. But guess what? Ahab had sent all these individuals out looking for Elijah, couldn't find Elijah. Elijah was safe at the brook. But remember, we're dealing with a drought. And in this drought, the brook dry up. So this brook was the source of life for Elijah. It was a little brook that was running down through where he was. So he woke up one morning and the brook was dry. And so God told him, say, Elijah, I'm going to need you to leave this place. I'm going to need you to leave the brook. But I got another stop for you. And it's a little bit similar to the Underground Railroad. He said, I got another safe haven for you. He says, I got a widow over there that she got a son, and I'm going to send you. I want you to go to her house. And when you get there, these are the instructions I want you to tell her. I want you to tell her that the Lord sent you to her house, and that the Lord wants you to prepare a meal for the prophet. Now, Minister Spencer touched on that this morning. He said this widow was recorded or rewarded because of her giving. She didn't question it, but it took some courage for her to take the last little meal out of her barrel and the last little crude oil out of her oil can and make a little whole cake of bread for a prophet. And I like what Minister Spencer said this morning. She didn't question him and ask him, say, now, the Lord talking to you, why he sent you to me to feed you when you're supposed to be the man of God? Say, now, God ought to be able to, and she must have thought about that thing and said, well, evidently God has a reason for sending this prophet here to me. So she was obedient. And she did her part in this witness protection program, and she took care of and she provided for Elijah while he was there. And of course, Minister Spencer shared with us that her barrel was overflowing. And it didn't say she had the sources to grind this meal, so we know that this meal was coming from a supernatural source. So God provided overflow because she had the courage to help the prophet. Now let's get to this Sunday school lesson. This is where we are now. The first few verses are omitted, verses 1 through 4. But our lesson picks up at verse 5. So our lesson print from verses 5 through 18. And as we look at this, we find that here in verse 5, it says, and Ahab said unto Obadiah, go into the land unto all the fountains of water and unto all the brooks. Peradventure we may find grass to save the horses and the mules alive, that we may lose not all the beasts. So they divided the land between them to pass throughout it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. And as Obadiah was in the way, behold, Elijah met him, and he knew him, and fell on his face and said, art thou that my Lord Elijah? And he answered him, I am. Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And he said, what have I sinned that thou wouldest deliver thy servant into the hand of Ahab to slay me? As the Lord thy God liveth, there is no nation or kingdom whether my Lord have not sent to seek thee. And when they said he is not there, he took an oath of the kingdom and the nation that they found thee not. And now thou sayest, go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And it shall come to pass as soon as I am gone from thee, that the Spirit of the Lord shall carry thee whither I know not. And so when I come to tell Ahab, and he cannot find thee, he shall slay me. But I, thy servant, fear the Lord from my youth. Was it not told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord, prophets, by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water. And now thou sayest, go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he shall slay me. Verse 15, and Elijah said unto the Lord of hosts, and Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself unto him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. And it came to pass when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said unto him, art thou he that troubleth Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but thou. and thy father's house, in that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and thou hast followed Baal. Now we find here that in the opening of the lesson, Ahab has commissioned Obadiah to help him to go on a mission. They're looking for, he said, we need to find some water, because if we find some water, perhaps we might find some grass near that water. We got to find something to feed these animals. If we don't feed these animals, we're going to lose them. And note, he was concerned about losing the animals because the animals was of value to him. They were a source of food for the people. So if the animal died, the people died. So we see here that King Ahab had a problem. So he said, so that we can cover more ground, we're gonna separate. We're gonna each go a different way and see what we come back with. And so Obadiah was obedient. And as soon as they parted ways, we see that Obadiah has an encounter with Elijah. Now, why didn't God send Elijah directly to King Ahab? We'll see that in just a few minutes, but he allowed this chance meeting between Elijah and Obadiah. And note now, Elijah had been in hiding in this witness protection program for 3 years. Undoubtedly, he was not groomed well, or he probably did not look like he did when Obadiah saw him 3 years ago. But note this, that Obadiah recognized Elijah immediately. And he said, art thou my Lord, Elijah? And note how he referenced this prophet. He referenced Elijah by calling him Lord, lowercase Lord. And Elijah answered and said, I am. So Elijah said, your eyes are not deceiving you. I'm who you think you're looking at. But now that was a reason that Obadiah was surprised when he laid eyes on Elijah. And he begins to go on to tell Elijah, he said, Elijah told him, say, now I want you to go and tell King Ahab that I'm here. And Obadiah, no doubt, thought about that thing. He said, now, wait a minute, Elijah. He said, what have I sinned? What did I do? Why you want to get me killed? He said, now, if I go up here and tell this upset man and Queen Jezebel that I done laid eyes on you, it's going to be trouble. They done look for you everywhere. This king have commissioned everything he has to find this man that pronounced this doom on our land. He said, we done looked every kingdom. He said, this king done searched high and he done searched low. And see, they can't find Elijah nowhere. So much so to every kingdom and nation that we went looking for you in, he made them folk pledge an oath. He had the kings to pledge an oath saying that they hadn't seen Elijah. He said, now you expect me to go look him in his eyes and tell him I done seen Elijah. He said, now what do you think gonna happen to me? And he said, furthermore, when I leave you here, the Lord gonna catch you up and call you somewhere else. And when I come back with this king, you gonna be gone. And look at Elijah. Elijah said, well, I tell you what. Elijah said, no, I'm gonna be here when you come back. Elijah said, on God. And you know, the young folk have this thing where when they pledge an oath, they say on such and such. So Elijah assured Obadiah that on God, I'm going to be here when Ahab get here. So we find that after being assured that Elijah would meet the king, Obadiah said, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about what's been going on while you've been gone. He said, this is another reason I don't want to go confront this king and tell him you're here, because not only is he going to kill me, but he's going to kill you too, because there's some things that's been going on here. Say, with all this drought and all this phantom that's going on, this king is so upset that treacherous wife of his, Jezebel, and they just didn't call her Jezebel because she wore red lipstick or she wore a lot of makeup, and because of the clothes that she wore. She was called Jezebel because of the personality that she had. She was just that. And you know, many times folk will call folk that in a slandered or a negative way, say, you ain't nothing but a Jezebel. So this woman earned her reputation. So Obadiah said, this woman been killing prophets. Say, these prophets catching hell because of what you did. She pointing the finger at you every time she see this king. She said, now, I know you ought to be able to find this one man Say, on all this big old earth, you tell me all the resources we got, y'all can't find one man. Say, now I know somebody got to be the scene and say, and all these folks you got taking oaths telling you that we hadn't seen Elijah. So here Obadiah says, I gotta tell you that, I'm gonna go tell the king what you want me to tell him, but I did some things while you was gone. Now Jezebel has put this creed out to kill all the prophets of God. He says, but some of them she didn't get a chance to kill because I took 100 of them and I put them in caves by 50. And not only did I put them in caves, he said, but I've been feeding these 100 prophets every day with bread and water. It was a reason that Obadiah told Elijah this. He wanted to pull out his receipts. He said, now I done some things that should earn me. He said, and I had to be courageous in order to do that, because not only is he going to kill me if I go tell him I done laid eyes on you, but if he found out I done hid these prophets and Jezebel had ordered them to be killed, it's going to be some trouble, period. And so he goes on and he said, I'm going to go and I'm going to arrange this meeting. So Obadiah is obedient and he arranges the meeting. And we know that after the meeting is arranged, Elijah appears before King Ahab. And in his appearance, we see that Elijah and Ahab are having a conversation. And the very first thing that Ahab says when he lays eyes on Elijah, he points his finger at him and says, oh, you the one. You the one. You the one that stirred up all this trouble around here. And then you done run and hid. But you're gonna pay the consequences now. It's gonna be consequences and repercussions now because of what you done. And Elijah didn't argue with him too much. Elijah said, no, I didn't do that. And Elijah pointed his finger back at him and said, look here, it's you and your daddy that did this. So y'all the reason that all this calamity. He said, I'm just the messenger. I didn't dry up the rain. I didn't shut up heaven. I don't have that kind of power. He said, now God gonna demonstrate some power that he has a few minutes from now when we go up here and build his altar. You're going to see who God is. Say, now the same God that's about to prove himself to you again, that's who shut up heaven. Say, so now don't get mad at me. You don't get mad with the mailman when he bring them bills and put them in the box. I just dropped this in your box and kept going. God told me to tell you that it was going to be shut up for 3 years and it's been shut up. Say, now you need to deal with God on that. And so as we look, we find Elijah and King Ahab having this interchange. And Elijah goes on to tell him, he says, God is ruling. He is in charge. He said, no matter what you, Queen Jezebel think, he said, y'all don't rule nothing around here but the little stuff that God allow y'all to have rule over. He said, now God is about to show you who really in charge. He said, so we're at this point now. And so we find here that Ahab was concerned. He told Elijah, he said, you stirred up all this trouble over here in Israel. He said, it's your fault that folks is dying and that all this is happening over here. Do that sound familiar to where we are today? We've heard things and we're witnessing things today where folks have pointed their finger at other folks that were in leadership positions and didn't accept responsibility. We've heard about the one fool and all that kind of foolishness there, and folks pointing fingers at other folks saying it's your fault, and God pointing back at them and saying, no, it's not their fault, it's your fault. And as leaders, we have to own up to our responsibility of what God puts us in charge of and what God has us over. He puts us in that place for a reason. So now let's look at courage. Now, where does courage come in with this lesson? Courage comes in with this lesson in that it first of all took courage for Obadiah to be able to do what he did in hiding out these spies. It took courage for this widow woman to give the prophet her last. Not knowing where anything else was going to come from, she had to have some courage in order to do that. And most importantly, the reason Elijah is called the prophet of courage is because Elijah, no doubt, had to have some courage, first of all, to come back. He knew that there was a bounty out for him. He knew how upset King Ahab was with him. He knew that Jezebel didn't like him, so it was going to take some courage for him to do what he needed to do. And what is courage? When we think about courage, what really is courage? And how do we get courage? And one of the most profound lessons about courage that I've seen came from that from the old favorite story that we all have seen, The Wizard of Oz. We know the story about the Wizard of Oz and how during that story of the Wizard of Oz, that each of those characters that Dorothy encountered was lacking something. Each one of them had something that they needed. Now, we know Dorothy needed to get home. And I want to put the Wizard of Oz in a religious perspective just for a few minutes. And every child of God should be trying to get home. But we also should be trying to help individuals around us. And Minister Spencer put that so plain this morning, in early morning. We ought to be helping folks around us. So Dorothy needed to get home. She met a scarecrow along this journey that didn't have a brain. He lacked the knowledge that he needed to be productive. And how many of us have met folk that just need a little help? And after meeting the scarecrow, Dorothy goes a little bit further and she meets a tin man in a field that had been out in the rain, and he had gotten a little rusty. He had his oil can with him, but he ended up getting rusty. And sometimes we pass folks along this journey that have their oil can with them. They just can't get to it, and they just need a little help to get to their oil can. So Dorothy and the scarecrow tell the tin man, come on and go with us to see this wizard. And he gonna help Dorothy get home. And the scarecrow say he gonna give me some brains because I ain't got no brains. So you can come on, go with us, and he'll give you a heart. So they travel on a little bit further, and they're traveling through the dark forest area, and out of the bushes jump the king of the jungle. He jumps out of the bushes and he's terrifying them and scaring them. And finally he sees Toto, the little dog of Dorothy, and he begins to chase Toto, and he's frightening Toto, and Dorothy slapping. And he began to boo-hoo like a baby. Oh, why did you do that? Why did you go and slap me? You didn't have to slap me. And he reveals to Dorothy that he has a problem. He said, I might look okay on the outside. He said, I might look like this big bad lion on the outside, but I got a problem. He said, now, I'm supposed to be the king of the jungle, but I got some issues too. It had to take courage for him to admit what he was about to admit. The last thing most folks want to do is admit their shortcomings. But this cowardly lion stood bold and told him that I'm a coward. He said, I'm a coward. I don't have any courage. He said, I need some courage. And Dorothy tells this lion that we're going to see this wizard. I got to get home, and the scarecrow here don't have a brain, and he's going to be able to get a brain, and the tin man doesn't have a heart. He's going to be able to get a heart. Come on, go with us to see this wizard, and I'm quite sure this wizard can give you some courage. So the cowardly lion agrees to go on this journey to find him some courage. And so they're journeying on, and there are several points on this journey that the lion show his lack of courage. He showed where he's a coward. He don't have any courage. So they make it all the way to see the wizard. They're walking down the corridor, and the lion is there. The lion is thinking about finally getting him some courage. And they're walking down, and all kind of stuff is going on around them, and the lion is nervous, and he got his own tail in his hand. And he walking through, and they hear the noises and stuff, and he's turned around 2 times and run back the other way. And so they grab him, and they're pulling him forward. And finally he admits, I can't go. Somebody's pulling my tail. Had his own tail in his own hand. But he was a coward. And he was so afraid that he ran and he jumped out the window. And they went and brought him back. All this was this brave lion who is the king of the jungle, who lacked courage. So they get him in to see the wizard, and the wizard is supposed to be this big bad guy, and they got this fire shooting and everything, and just terrifies the lamb to death. Just told I'm quite sure the lamb thought several times, if I know what I was going to have to go through all this to get this here courage, I'd have left this here courage where it was. But the essence of that story is that each of those characters already had what they went looking for. So what is the importance of the essence of this lesson? This lesson is important because we each need courage. And the prophet Elijah is a very good example of courage. Now, mind you, the lamb did get his courage, but his courage was simply a little badge or a necklace that was put around his neck. And I'm quite sure there wasn't very much courage in that necklace. But guess what that necklace did? That necklace allowed the lamb to believe that he had courage. So we just need something sometime to help us to believe that we got that thing that we're looking for. Because that thing that we're looking for more than not is already in us. We just have to work on bringing it out. So when we look at that story of the Wizard of Oz, it's simply about folk who that we encounter every day. Folk that we walk by every day, folk that we see every day. And you'll be surprised at what one simple word or one small word of encouragement could do for someone's day. You may encounter somebody that might just be going through, that might just be feeling so down. And you might just look at that person and may just say, after being nourished and moved by the Spirit, to say, hold your head up and smile. Everything all right. Everything's all right. And you never know how that little bit of encouragement may change that individual's whole day, or could change that individual's whole life. So as we look at this, we find that Elijah is a prime example of the courage that we need to exhibit. Not only Elijah, but so was Obadiah. In order, as we close this lesson, I have to close it by going to the visual. And I told you that this passage of scripture in 1 Kings is known for the showdown at Mount Carmel. And at Mount Carmel, God had to prove not only who he is, but what he can do. So at Mount Carmel, the prophets of Baal put Elijah to a challenge. They say, now Elijah, here is what we gonna do. We gonna call on our God, and our God gonna spark some fire on this wood over here, and this wood gonna light. They prayed and they cried and they called, and nothing happened. So much so the folks started saying, well, y'all God must be sleepy. He must be hard to hear. He must can't hear what he gonna do. And Elijah's sitting here all the time knowing that God is gonna do what he said he's gonna do. He's just that kind of God. So when it came Elijah's time, Elijah said, I tell you what, I want y'all to do something for me. He said, now, I know this dry wood will burn. He said, but if you got any water around here? Now, think about this question that Elijah asking these folks who hadn't seen rain in 3 years. Elijah said, is you got any water around here anywhere that we can wet these logs? He said, because God is about to do something here. He says, but I want you to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God did it. Now, I hadn't seen too many other folk that can burn wet wood. But Elijah called on his God, and God answered by fire. And Pastor asked me this morning, said, Brother Mills, you ain't going to start no fire page. And Sister Coco was messing with me on yesterday. I told her, I said, no, I ain't going to bring no matches because God is fire all by himself. And the only thing we have to do is trust him and believe him. And even to those enemies and those individuals that we have out there, we don't have to worry about our enemies. God already got our back. God never guides where he don't provide. And Elijah is the prime example of that. If God tell you to go down by the brook and wait, don't you ask God, say, God, I don't see no Popeyes over there. I don't see no witness over there by the brook, God. I don't see where I'm going to eat over there by the brook, God. You just go down to the brook and wait on God. And Elijah was obedient. Elijah had the courage to go down there and wait by the brook. And guess what? The brook might run dry, but guess what? God don't need the brook because he is Jehovah Jireh. He is Jehovah Nissi. He is Jehovah Rapha. He is God all by himself. When he told Moses to go see Pharaoh, and Moses said, who I'm going to tell them sent me? He says, tell them that I am. And God is I am. He's everything we need, just what we need. That's just what God is. So at the showdown on the mountain, Elijah simply needed one thing. Elijah said, now, God, I know you. I know you can do what you say you're going to do. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've witnessed you provide for me, having birds deliver my meal. I went to a widow's house, Lord, and I didn't know why you sent me to this widow's house, but I know. And this is the unique thing about that. Not only did the widow bless the prophet, but the prophet was blessed to be a blessing. It was because of Elijah that now she had a constant stream of blessings. And God said if we'll be faithful, he would cause men to give unto us and overflow it. And he said, you can press that down and I'm going to overflow it some more. So when we obedient, God can do that. So at the mountain for the showdown, now Elijah needs God to do one thing for him. Elijah checked his pockets. He said, Lord, I don't have no matches. He looked at this altar. He said, Lord, I done had them to wet this wood. He said, now, it's going to take me a long time if I have to do this Boy Scout style and rub these logs together. He said, Lord, I don't think that's going to happen, Lord. He said, I don't think that if I'm going to start no time soon. He said, but this is what I need you to do for your servant, Lord. He said, I just need you to rain down some fire on these logs. And then Elijah did probably like many of the other prophets say, Lord, you don't have to do it for my sake, Lord. I already know you can do it, Lord. But Jezebel and Ahab and all these other folks around here that's trusting in Baal, they need to see this happen today, Lord. He said, so I need you to be fire today, Lord. And God became fire because he said, I am that I am. And that's the way God works and moves in our lives. He become whatever we need him to be because he is just that. I am. So we can take courage and encouragement in these lessons in knowing that God provides for us. And when God gives you a word, you have to go speak that word. You got to be courageous. You got to be bold. Don't care who it offend. Don't care who it hurt. And don't care what kind of bounty they put on you for that word that you speak. You got to be obedient to what God calls you to do. And I want to share just a few takeaways or key points from the lesson, and then I'm going to close with the conclusion. The key learnings from this lesson is God uses courageous people during difficult times. It's in those hard times and in those hard spaces that God takes the least expected individual and he used them in a mighty way. And anxiety shows up when we don't understand or perhaps when we don't agree with what's going on. We get anxious. And that's what courage is all about. Courage is simply being able to do that thing that you need to do, even when you don't know what the outcome of it is going to be. It's having the faith and being able to step up to the plate and do that. Courage is not a display of our strength, but rather a display of our trust in God. Our courageous moves are made by faith in God. It took faith for Elijah to stand on this mountain and brag about what God could do, knowing that God could do it. And guess what? God had assured him that he was going to show up, and he knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that he was a prophet. That was confirmed by the widow when she gave Elijah her last. And God called you because Elijah told her, say, if you give me this meal, God is going to bless you. He's going to cause you to have overflowing blessings. And after this widow saw this come to pass, she said, you are the prophet of God. And what makes a prophet? It's not simply by folk calling you a prophet, but by the things that you say coming to pass. So Elijah was assured in that. God is not just the God of past victories. We can know him by his pattern, and we can have courage in the things that he's already done. Those victories that God have already won in the past, he can do it again. And Brother Moore said yesterday when he was cutting this wood for me, he said, Brother Mills, he said, you know what? He said, the same God that set them logs on fire back then can do it again. And God can do that. And Elijah's challenge of courage was spoken into power. What's mine is yours. What do you fear? Persecution, rejection, failure, or loss? What's stopping you from making boss moves and being courageous? And that's another phrase that the young people say, when they're doing things, they're making boss moves. So Elijah was making boss moves, and the boss moves that Elijah was making was according to the will of God and the purpose and plan that God had for Elijah's life. And our lesson conclusion will come from our commentary, the Townsend commentary, concluding reflection. The ancient Hebrew prophets were usually sent to preach to a people who had a reputation of deserting the Lord. Generations earlier, Israel had been commanded to remain faithful, yet they repeatedly turned aside to worship other gods, and God condemned and punished them for that. Is there a lesson for the church today in this ancient text? Yes. And it is this: God still requires faithfulness in his people. In this chapter of world history, there is a desperate need for Christians to return to the simple faith and unwavering commitment of the early Christian church. These are perilous times for the world and difficult times for the church. The world needs bold witnesses who will challenge the voices of atheism, the belief that there is no God, moral compromise in and out of the church, and secular humanism, the belief that the world is no longer governed by biblical principles or biblical worldview. The Lord is still calling for those who love him to be true and faithful to the charge and commands of the Master. And the closing prayer for our lesson this morning says, Lord, teach us to number our days so that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. May we never stray from the path of righteousness. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. And we do ask that you would stay with us for our mid-morning worship service at 11 a.m., where our message will be brought by our own pastor, Dr. Charlie Williams.